subscribing and leaving comments.
Who's at Manor Lodge Motel number 51? I'll get back to you, too. I'll go to check. Okay, our next talk is by Jack Lapseritis of Roseburg, Oregon, who is an applied anthropologist. He's going to talk about the long title, I'll just say, consistent difficulties in documenting evidence.
Just a minute. What's the
problem?
Mr. Greenwald, did you receive my letter about Jack Lapseritis? And the enclosed newspaper clippings?
Yes.
And you let him allowed to speak, do you? It's your conference. I think you're making a very, very grave mistake. I just thought to bring it up, you go ahead. So you have our objection on record, okay?
Objection on record, and that's okay.
I'm speaking today on the Sasquatch Ethos, dealing with the difficulties of documenting evidence. Over the last 3 decades of field research by a few hundred Bigfoot investigators, sadly, no acceptable proof of existence of such a hominoid has been forthcoming. This can be placed in 2 basic categories. That is the hard evidence, which constitutes indisputable scientific proof. That is a corpse or part of the body, bones, or a captured feature itself. The next is soft evidence, which is what many of us here have dealt with in our own investigations, which consist of the few thousand footprints, some handprints, unidentifiable hair, blood, fecal material, tape-recorded vocal sounds, some questionable photographs and moving film. None of which is acceptable to mainstream science. So quoting the statistics and analysis in each of these cases really has little value at this point in my own presentation, because we don't really have a Sasquatch in order to measure this material against. And it's the job of science to measure, to compare, and to categorize. So myself, in finding soft evidence, it's quite exciting when you find footprints or hair, but at the same time, we don't have a Sasquatch in order to compare this against. So it can be dismissed by mainstream science just out of hand. Why is there no proof? It could be, and I'm going to list 3 things here that I want to focus on. That is that could it be that something is wrong with the field methodology, that is with our approach. Number 2, the Sasquatch perhaps is something other than what we believe it is. Number 3, it could be a combination of both. After all, it's been nearly 35 years that many people have been out hunting, researching, and we still don't have the proof. Maybe, just maybe, if researchers change their method of obtaining evidence, on the grounds that the Sasquatch is more unique than has been given credit for. That is, if we devise or tailor a field method based on behavioral evidence, we may get more soft evidence, which would lead to obtaining the hard proof that we all want. It's like coming in to a house through the back door. One gets in the house anyway. Again, there is something seriously wrong with our approach to the problem if we still don't have the acceptable evidence. So here, though as a social scientist, I'm interested in proof, my approach has always been cultural in my own work, working with Indian people. And I feel that for myself, I have devised my own approach, which I'd like to share today. It's a new proposal for Sasquatch field methodology. I call this approach an empirical holistic paradigm to be used as a major step in obtaining proof. I listed in three categories here. The first, simply the empirical system, of which we're all familiar with. The second part of this new approach is a humanistic approach to field work. Instead of violence or wanting to kill, it would be more proper to perhaps peacefully find out just what it is we're trying to kill before we go out and hunt it. And number three, a more thorough and more sensitive approach to interviewing of witnesses. Now, I'd like to break this down, the three of these down, so to give you a better idea of what I mean. Going back to number one, which is the empirical system, I'm saying use the present system as far as it can go in an effort to gain tangible physical evidence. So apply the conventional scientific dogma to the problem until there's no trace of evidence left to follow. Number two, the humanistic approach. This is an extension, actually, of the empirical system. And that is, this requires no guns whatsoever, and at least at first, no cameras in the field. Where I've discovered that I never brought a gun into the field, but I discovered bringing a camera, and in the beginning, a zoom lens movie camera, that the creature always knew when I had the camera on hand and would keep its distance. So each time I left the camera at home, it would approach the tent, my tent. The humanist approach is non-violent in nature, which means putting away or putting aside all fear. Animals and even people have this way of detecting fear. We use the term sometimes vibes, coming into a room or visiting someone, just a general feeling. And certainly a dog knows if you're fearful or not, and many times a vicious dog, person who's unafraid because they love dogs, can walk right by or right up to such a dog. So I feel that this is a very important point, because it makes one, without cameras and without a gun, it makes a person very vulnerable. And this is precisely what I propose. It appears, and there is some conflict here, which is okay, because I think the Sasquatch are very unique in the sense that in some areas of different countries, in some areas of North America, there have been reports of, at times, some aggression, though it appears to be rare. There's also been signs of a lot of curiosity. And certainly we read every year where there's somewhere in Alaska or at one of our national parks, a bear mauling someone, and certainly we've not read anything of that nature concerning the Sasquatch. So they seem to be, in a sense, xenophobic or fearful of man. So the idea here is to make oneself vulnerable, to put some of your fears aside, and to view the Sasquatch as, at least from this standpoint, zoologically speaking, a little more than an animal, giving it a little more credit for its uniqueness. After all these years, we know very little about the Sasquatch, about raising of young, about we can only speculate on some of the omnivorous nature of it based on different foods that it's stolen or was eating in different places. But I believe that in placing oneself in their environment, that we're on its turf without stalking the creature. And this is really important. It appears, and I've seen this pattern over and over again, where you have people going into an area where there's been numerous Bigfoot sightings. And at that time, a whole number of people will go in with guns and so on, thinking, now it's here, now we have it. But all of a sudden, they don't have it. It's just not there. And I believe this stalking drives the creature away, that it's somehow some innate, possibly intuitive ability, or simply being very sharp in however it feels or monitors its environment, has this ability to leave the area immediately. Now, some of the areas that I've gone into myself, they've come around the camp, and again, no cameras and no guns. So this seems to make a lot of sense to me. Now, we're still on number 2 in terms of the humanistic approach. When a researcher, based on present demographics, decides on a geographic location, and some of the work that I've done was based on John Green's fine work in pinpointing different areas, and I can see that it must have been a very meticulous job, very tedious, to arrange all this and collect it through the years, but it was immensely helpful in trying to decide the different areas that I would go into. And once a person decides, then in the Jane Goodall tradition, long-term, long-range field research should be conducted, as I have done, and again, allow the creature to observe the research. It seems to be a pattern where some areas I went into and stayed for months alone, and absolutely nothing happened. Other areas I went into, one particular place, for almost 5 months, and there was 15 different times gigantic crashing going on around me. I've never found a footprint, never a tree down, yet I heard crashing of trees in that particular area. And that was in Michigan, incidentally.
Oh, God.
Now, certainly in this way, at least I found, you lure the creature to you. This takes a lot of patience, it takes a lot of time, it takes getting out of the office, it takes getting out of the comforts of our home in order to wait. I would read, would meditate, I would write while in the field, and also continue, as I've done through the years, to learn the identification of plants, especially to understand what is edible in the area for a Sasquatch, which would eat something very similar to ourselves. So this kind of research is strictly sedentary, where no stalking, again, is involved. And as John Keats, the poet, said, and I'll paraphrase him, that you can chase a butterfly all day and never catch one, but when you turn your thoughts to other things, it'll slowly come and light on your shoulder. I'm not insinuating a Sasquatch would come and light on your shoulder or something, but certainly this seems to be the pattern. I noticed the pattern, and when I worked with the Great Lakes Indians, I had spoke to many medicine people, of which I worked closely with, and studied herbs and survival. And they said to me, there was one situation where I was camping with an Indian family on their property where the Sasquatch was coming in, and the Indian finally pulled me aside and said, don't think of the Sasquatch, don't chase after the Sasquatch. This was in 1979. And he said, if you do, you'll keep pushing him further away, that sometimes you can fall onto a Sasquatch. That is, if his powers of concentration is collecting food or doing something, then you could come upon them. But if your mind is set on them and you're going to try to stop them or photograph or shoot them, that they seem to stay away. And this seemed to, I didn't believe him at the time, but this seemed to have held true in all these years that I've been doing research. So this takes a certain, actually, transformation of the scientist from an armchair theorist to what I call an experiential scientist. That is one that goes out into the field that experiences what the Sasquatch is all about. I know many of us have gone into the field, but I say again in the Jane Goodall tradition, which is very difficult to do. I had even quit a good-paying job to go at one point in time for nearly 2 years, traveling to different areas and living alone in the wilderness, which was a great sacrifice, getting caught in the cold and snow and rain and just missing all the comforts. But this is what I wanted to do. This was very important to me. And so during these periods of time, one starts to, from a distance, kind of interact. And that is, you start to understand a little bit more what the Sasquatch is all about. Now, if George Schaller or Jane Goodall claimed to have discovered a new species of chimpanzee, hypothetically here, that is eluding the best photographer, yet when other field scientists were brought into the field, some of them were fortunate enough to have encounters with these rare chimpanzees, and yet there was no proof. If these people were trained observers and they were observing this, and especially if they were working with, we'll say hypothetically again, Jane Goodall, people would start to tend to believe that there's something out there, there's something very important going on. If several people were coming back and saying, yes, I experienced that, yes, I saw them, and yet you may not have a dead chimpanzee, one may not have photographs of these rare chimpanzees, yet experientially we have people with credentials, we have people with credibility that are making these statements because they've experienced it. And this is precisely what I'm getting at working with the humanistic approach that is an extension again of the empirical method. Now, the Bigfoot having hair in no apparent technology does not prove that they are zoological animals as defined by science. We must move ahead more cautiously and reevaluate more objectively who and what the Sasquatch might really be. To subjectively ignore investigating anomalous reports, for example, is outright unscientific. More open-mindedness and cooperation is needed among researchers in sharing new approaches such as this. Using this kind of humanistic methodology, in the last 10 years, I have physically seen a Sasquatch on 7 different occasions. 1 in Wisconsin and 6 times in Oregon. So this is a successful approach. Getting to number 3, which has to do with interviewing of witnesses, which I consider very important. It involves, I've discovered that many witnesses will not tell you the entire episode as to what actually occurred for fear of ridicule, and also because they were still in a state of disbelief, especially when it had to do with anomalous encounters that go beyond conventional explanation. Now, I am not into sensational anomalous reports. It is not something I am seeking out. As a social scientist, I am seeking the universal truth, not man-made or man-developed measurements that does not holistically, and I stress the word holistically, measure the entire spectrum of truth. Now, I'm like a cobbler. A cobbler does not mutilate the naturalness of the foot in order to fit the shoe. He meticulously tailors the man-made shoe to conform to the natural state of affairs, which may well be, again, a normal foot. So science, in coming into new areas, especially with these elusive phenomena that we cannot clear-cut and neatly categorize exactly what we're dealing with, like the Sasquatch, Bigfoot phenomenon, then we have to listen to what is happening in the field. That is, we have to have a holistic approach in order to better measure exactly what we're dealing with. And again, as a social scientist, I'm interested in culture and behavior. So certainly that's an area that my perception is a little sharper on, so I see that, even though I truly want physical evidence as well, or want greater proof, but certainly not to kill a creature to do it. So my approach, holistic approach, I've been using it for the last 10 years, even though I've been researching for the last 33. I've been sort of a closet researcher, reading all the material and in this area. Started out collecting degrees in liberal arts and in conservation, and later concentrating in anthropology, receiving degrees also in psychology and community health planning for Native American people. I have 120 credits in anthropology, no degree in anthropology, but certainly my whole background is there. So this whole approach was quite eclectic for me, and I know that the thesis in applied anthropology certainly didn't help directly here to as a physical anthropologist, but in specializing in Native American studies, that whole area was very helpful, especially in working and living with Indian medicine people as they shared some of their views of the Sasquatch. I feel that what witnesses are reporting is very important. In the last 10 years, I've carefully documented 59 anomalous reports from honest citizens, in which 2 of the cases I consider bogus. Physical scientists say that the witnesses basically are unreliable. And this may be true in some cases. I don't entirely disagree. But the more witnesses, the more the possibility that what they are saying is true, especially when dealing with these elusive phenomena. phenomena not even science is capable of defining and categorizing at this present time. Would 5 or possibly 10 witnesses satisfy the scientist in some areas where we're trying to understand behaviorally who the Sasquatch are? Well, I have 57 people that I have documented that I have come to believe is confluent to some of their statements with the true nature of Sasquatch ecology. In a court of law, one witness can put a person in the electric chair. Again, I have 57 witnesses throughout the years. As William James said, and I quote, "It takes only one white crow to prove that all crows are not black." And in my research, analogously speaking, I have 57 white crows. In concluding here, much of my work will be out in print next year in a book that I've collected this data on, that would give more of a comprehensive picture of what I've done. In applying the holistic field approach that I have just mentioned, a humanistic nonviolent presentation I feel is very important. In that way, the researcher, once again, will be able to experientially determine just exactly what we are after. Are we after Sasquatch the animal, or Sasquatch the hairy nature people? Thank you very much.
I think we're going to break for the coffee break. Well, maybe just one question back there.
Thank you. Thank you, Grover. Jack, I wanted to ask you a few questions if I could.
Make them kind of quick.
Have you ever seen a Sasquatch?
Yeah, 7 different occasions I have.
Well, I have on record here in documentation that you supplied me with that you claim as of December 10th, 1987, 235 encounters with Sasquatch.
Yes, encounters, not sightings.
Oh, I see.
Okay.
Okay. One last question. Now, also, there's a magazine now the April '89 issue of Magical Blend, where you claim that in, I believe it was 1977 or 78, that 3 Sasquatch astrally projected themselves to your bedroom in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I was wondering if you would perhaps elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, I'm keeping this very zoological here. And as I said, that all that I've experienced and the 57 other people that are very well documented will be out in my book coming out next year in spring.
Well, in the letter dated to me...
This is a zoological conference or symposium that I'm sticking strictly to their rules and regulations.
Well, in the letter dated May 18th, '89, you claim that makes 29 people to date who have reported the phenomenon to me. Yet on your promotional flyer, you claim 50.
Yes, there's
Quite
all
a
the time, as a matter of fact, every month or 2 or 3, people approach me, and so I continue to collect as I have the last 30 years.
Okay, since this is now bordering on the paranormal, just one more.
Yeah, sure does.
Yes.
No brains.
We had hoped that each of these speakers would cut himself 5 minutes short, but it hasn't happened yet. We will try. Yeah. Okay, coffee break until 4 o'clock.
If you're enjoying all this rare and unique content, please show your support by subscribing and leaving comments.